We were left with a fairy tale style ending to the first film. Warm, cozy, some things were at stake in a new world. The scary elements of the first movie were definitely spooky sometimes, but not really merged with any continuous theme or lasting concept. They were more there to enhance the sense of importance of the characters' adventures. In the first film, if you pay close attention, at the end of the scary scenes, there was always a character that gave some sort of moral commentary to make the situation a bit more fairy tale-like and a bit more lighter. The encounter at the forest ends with the centaur talking about unicorn blood. The chess scene ends with Hermione's mini-speech about bravery. The scary scene with the jump scare from the restricted section library book ends with Dumbledore's speech near the mirror. So, none of these scenes really had a continuous depth, or maybe a sense of darkness, to make the older audience think that this movie was catered towards them. However, the second movie sees no reason to justify or resolve a spooky atmosphere with a warm and cozy commentary, but rather draws this haunting effect until it is resolved at the very end of the film, if even that. Interestingly, not only does it do this with the main plot, but also with the character dilemmas as well. It deals with some heavy topics such as doubt in one's morals, justifying convictions, fraud, intentions, prejudice, and so on, and it's not afraid to leave these topics unresolved until the very end of the film. So as you can see, the second movie's whole purpose in the franchise was to say, no, this is a ride you didn't see coming, and this is a ride you're not going to want to get off of anytime soon. This movie is the most realistic, and here's why. It really takes away from the fantasy feel and adds more presence for the viewer because of all the mysteries. The atmosphere is no longer just a pleasant setting, but it's a place with detail and different niches. Never before, or never really after this movie, did we get such different feelings while being in different places of the same castle. Not really, if you think about it. And it's not just darker or more mysterious because of the plot, but as mentioned, there are character dilemmas introduced that even though we don't get answers to them at the end, the movie manages to realistically resolve the doubts about Potter's character emotionally.
Training for the ballet, Potter!
The dialogues are more witty and more focused. This movie has the most one-on-one conversations than the rest of the films. Most dialogues in movies are for some sort of emotional goal in changing mood in the film, for comedy, for sad mood, for informational purposes, etc. But in The Chamber of Secrets, the dialogues are just dialogues for the purpose of being dialogues. None of the dialogues are overly edited, interrupted with music, or sudden changes of overly artistic camera work. They are just dialogues. In fact, the camera work does its best to aid the viewer to focus on these dialogues only, and the character reactions more than the surroundings. It zooms on their faces and their eyes, and it takes time for the lines to be introduced and progress into natural reactions from both sides, which adds more depth to the characters beyond just their animated personalities. We see characters take realistic time to do things and have their effect on their surroundings, unlike the rest of the films like The Order of the Phoenix or the beginning of The Goblet of Fire, or some places in The Prisoner of Azkaban. This is because out of all the movies, Chamber of Secrets is the only one that has the dryness of style, of aesthetic. It doesn't seem to have any sort of specific filter to create a fantasy film. Proper balance of special effects.
Simple, but powerful.
Again, when we think about movies in the past few years, we can't really think of many specific special effects scenes that made a very lasting impression. As in, they might have been really amazing, but we can't really remember any specific reason for them, or they simply looked like any other special effects you would expect in an action or fantasy film. Part of the reason may be that nowadays special effects are so abundant, and perhaps with an installation or purchase of a special effects set or whatever filmmakers purchase, they want to make the most out of it. But that only makes the film look mainstream, and although they may have an immediate impact on the viewer's senses, it isn't very timeless. Proper use of special effects is keeping the effects special. To use them as an aid to add something special to the emotions you want to portray in a scene. Chamber of Secrets does this fantastically compared to the other movies in the series. Think of all the action scenes that are seamlessly blended into the plot. Action and special effects scenes don't have to be something in and of themselves to be effective. We don't need a whole few-minute chunk of action and special effects and then suddenly calm things down to the rest of the film. At the contrary, they only work well when they are blended into the rest of the action, blended into dialogues that actually make sense and have a purpose. Most action movies have 1 or 2 sentence dialogues, but they aren't really realistic. Dialogues that are randomly added in between a special effects scene just to indicate that the characters are still there beneath the CGI or whatever else is added doesn't really explain what's going on with the effects themselves. It may just be there for comedy. If you think about all the scenes with special effects in the movie, except for the basilisk scene, you might not even be able to notice any of the special effects scenes. But there were so many special effects additions in this movie that were spread all throughout the film. In the diary scene, the car scene, the potions making scene, the phoenix itself, Dobby. They were so good not only because they were good special effects. In fact, at some points, if you watch the movie with today's standard, they might stand out. But they fit so well into the movie because first they were dispersed and blended with the other movie elements like sound, proper flow, and use of models. After all, the logic behind special effects is the same as the logic behind movies. Imagination. We all know we're reading a book, we all know we're watching a movie, and it's not real. Just like how we know special effects isn't. But a good movie is one that has enough to supply the viewer with enough to supply their imagination to continue watching, even if some elements of filmmaking fail to continue to trick us into thinking we're not really watching a movie, like bad acting or bad design, etc.
So on Chamber of Secrets, we shot all of those sequences early, giving us 9 months to do the visual effects, which meant sequences where the visual effects characters, the CGI characters, were better integrated into the actual, the sequences between the actors. The actors are better in the second film. I just felt that we had reached a point where Dan Radcliffe particularly was feeling a lot more confidence and self-assurance, and you see that in his performance in this film.
Note quite the opposite to The Half-Blood Prince. There is nothing romantic or artistic about the filters used in this film, and this is genius for what the film had to do for the franchise. Remember how we said Harry Potter is so successful because it fills every niche and caters to a diverse audience? Well, this is exactly what the second movie does. It's still disguised behind the elements that drove the first film, but it suddenly snapped in directions that left room for lots of heavier topics and a rougher atmosphere. The movie, contrary to The Half-Blood Prince, has no aesthetic, or it has the aesthetic of what you expect to see in a 1980s British mystery show. Remember how we said that The Half-Blood Prince does an amazing job at creating an atmosphere that makes you feel like you're present in the movie? Well, The Chamber of Secrets does so just as well, but with a completely different technique. Its documentary-like style of plot-driven suspenseful events is how it does so. Why do I say this? Well, remember how a part of aesthetic is lighting, filters, and music? The first film was very bright and warm and introduced the variety of music genres in the series. The third film, most people's favorite, had famous melodies and famous artistic cinematography. The fourth film was of course known for its action and adventure and the many different sets. The fifth for its animated style, and the sixth, of course, as we said before, was known for its absolutely stunning soundtracks and lighting filters. However, when you think about the second movie, can you think about any specific soundtrack other than the 1 or 2 that came up in the chamber or when they were following the spiders? No. And that was the whole point of this movie. In fact, it is so effective in driving the plot in its own style that it recruits the music from the first movie and adds its own style and sense to it. For example, one of the most eerie pieces of music in the series is the one that was also used in the first movie, when Harry sneaks into the restricted section. At the end, this film and The Half-Blood Prince are the 2 movies that spend the most time exploring the different details of the castle. In The Half-Blood Prince by romanticizing the aesthetics, and in The Chamber of Secrets by extensive use of realism and dry British mystery directing. In both cases, they manage to pull the viewer into the details of the work and the tension of the drama. Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince was made a year after Shrek 1. But does this seem like it was? Well, the first thing I want to say is, of course not. One's a comedy animation, and the second one is a fantasy mystery set in the 1990s. But consider how vastly different Chamber of Secrets feels compared to, for example, Prisoner of Azkaban. It almost feels like they were made in different decades. But why was it so? Was it intentional? Of course. Directing aside, The Chamber of Secrets brought with it a sense of fullness that didn't compare with any of the other movies or animations made at the time. It's hard to think about a movie that had so much to offer in terms of subplots, Most of the time, as a child, you think a movie is really full, but when you watch it as an adult, you see that the plot was very simple and you attribute its style of animation and detail for plot fullness. But Chamber of Secrets really feels just as full when you watch it as an adult. There were so many settings within the castle to explore, and they actually spend a lot of time in them. Like the bathroom to make the potion, McGonagall's class, the hall, Snape's office, the staircase to Dumbledore's office, the Slytherin common room, the reading room, the battle hall, and more and more. The most important part of all this is that this movie has such realistic time movement that although a lot of detail is covered and the movie is almost 2 hours and 40 minutes long, it really feels like a good British mystery film, as I said before. Readers also claim that this is the best book-to-movie adaptation. Really, this movie feels most like a book than the rest of the movies in the series, if you know what I mean. Before Harry Potter, when we thought of witches and magic, we always considered something Merlin-like, witches with specific features like those described in fairy tales or in Disney movies even. The first and second Harry Potter movies both have that sort of feel to them. They really started the franchise with what people would consider as somewhat familiar. As mentioned, you wouldn't really pin a certain time setting to those two films if you didn't know about Harry's life in the Muggle world. But from the third movie onward, the movies just feel like they were in a more modern setting. This adds to that haunting effect that prepares the franchise so well to be handed over to Alfonso Cuarón, the director of the third movie, to reimagine the world building once again after the foundations were set in the first two films. People often group Sorcerer's Stone and Chamber of Secrets together, but really I never did. They seem to me to be actually vastly different, and their only similarity is their tone of world building. So at last, no matter how forgettable some elements of the movie may be, it is impossible to deny the sudden tease of heaviness and suspense brought to the series by this movie. It's hard to describe why this movie is my favorite, but in one sentence I have to say, strong start to a strong plot. Thank you for watching.